This video should hopefully serve as a bit of a warning to you if you use buy now, pay later services, particularly as Christmas approaches and you're going to want to buy lots more gifts and pay for them later. Lots of these services offer you the opportunity to buy something but pay for it later, either 3 months later, 4 months later, or even up to 12 months later. But they offer you this on interest free. Now, there's a couple of caveats with this. Now, first of all, whilst it's interest free, there are one or two drawbacks. So welcome back to the channel, but if you're new to me, I'm a barrister who helps you to understand law. So I'd really appreciate it if you hit that like button and subscribe if you aren't already. So first of all, just a bit of the boring legal stuff, which, let's face it, that's what I'm here for and that's what you are here for. With me, that is. So a consumer credit agreement is one that is protected under the Consumer Credit Act of 1974, but it only kicks in if it is deemed to be a regulated agreement. In other words, it is one that meets the requirements that it needs to be regulated, thus to attract the protections that you will be afforded by the Consumer Credit Act. So therefore, it's important to understand what an exempt agreement is and what the protection is under the Consumer Credit Act that you miss out on because it's an exempt agreement. Well, good questions. Let's start with the protection. The protection is under Section 75 of the Consumer Credit Act, which means if you've purchased something with credit between £100 and £30,000, it's protected under Section 75 of the Consumer Credit Act, meaning you can bring a like claim against the credit provider as you can against the trader that sold you the goods. Unless, of course, it's one of the agreements that it doesn't apply to, such as land, but we'll cover that in another video. This is assuming that we're talking about borrower-lender-supply agreements, that is to say for finance, for the acquisition of goods and services for a fixed amount. So in short, if it were a regulated agreement and there's a problem with the goods, you can bring a like claim against the company that's provided you with the finance as you can against the company that sold you the goods or the services. However, if it's an exempt agreement, you cannot bring such a claim under Section 75 against the credit provider. So now let's look at what an exempt agreement might look like. Well, simply put, if the amount to be repaid is fixed and it's for goods and services and it's to be repayable in no more than 12 months and no more than 12 payments, then it may be an exempt agreement for the purposes of the Consumer Credit Act, meaning you do not get the protection that you would otherwise get if it were a regulated agreement. Bearing in mind also that it must not be an agreement for financing the purchase of land, it must not be a conditional sale or hire purchase agreement, it must not be a pawn agreement, no giggling at the back there, and it must also contain no charges and there cannot be any interest, ordinarily, to set up the finance agreement. What makes this even worse, sort of, is that it's really easy to get hold of this buy now, pay later finance, in inverted commas, agreement because it only goes through a soft credit check. Why is that important? Well, it doesn't go through a full credit check, which in ordinary circumstances, it would check your affordability through all the systems that happen in the cloud network, such as how much credit you've got available, whether you've missed any payments, whether you are a reliable credit repayer. And if you're not reliable, then it won't give you the credit because it goes through all those checks beforehand. But if it's one of these buy now, pay later that only does a soft credit check, which is to confirm your very basic details, to confirm that you are who you say you are, then they provide you with the buy now, pay later credit. Then they allow you to purchase the goods and they can still sue you for the amount that you've agreed to pay, even though you've agreed to pay it at a later date. This is why the government and the FCA are looking to try to tighten up and strengthen these rules regarding buy now, pay later, because there's a huge risk that you can run up lots of these buy now, pay later agreements that you actually cannot afford, because all they do is confirm who you are when they agree to sell it to you. It doesn't go on your credit report as such, and it doesn't go through any affordability checks to determine that you can actually afford to repay this credit. The warning, obviously, that comes along with this is that whilst it might be interest and admin charge free to set this up, if you miss payments, they can legitimately still charge you fees for paying late or administrative fees for chasing you for the money, because at that point it becomes a breach of contract, much like a parking charge notice where they are charging you an admin fee for not having paid on time or not having paid for what you've agreed to do. They can, of course, also pass this debt to a debt collection agency, who might also add their fees to the collection, and that might well be within the terms and conditions of the original credit agreement in the first place. Taking some examples, as reported by The Sun, so credit where it's due, ClearPay charge £6 for a missed payment and a further £6 if it's not paid within a week. But the charges don't go above 25% of the total cost of the order. Presumably this is to avoid any inference and argument that it is amounting to unfair charges that would bring it within the regulations for a regulated credit agreement. Klarna, on the other hand, according to The Sun at least, doesn't charge any late fees, and Monzo starts charging interest at 25% if you don't pay within 7 days of missing a payment. And Barclays doesn't make a charge, but it will affect your credit score. So they will report it on your credit rating if you miss that payment. But remember, it will only be a regulated credit agreement if it meets all of the requirements and doesn't come within one of the exempt agreements under the Consumer Credit Act. And of course, remember, it really does depend on the company and the credit provider as to whether or not it will show up on your credit report, such as Experian and Equifax. So if you are planning to take out any of these for purchasing and financing your Christmas gifts and anything else for that matter, please do make sure that you can afford it before you agree to these payments, because not only might they charge you additional fees if you miss the payments, whilst they can't charge you fees to set it up because that would make it a regulated agreement, they can come back to you later for those additional fees and send debt collection agencies after you, take you to court, and so on and so forth. And as I said earlier, the FCA is trying to, and may well, bring in regulations to force these companies to make the additional affordability checks to ensure that you can afford to repay these things just because it is in your interests to do so. In fact, just recently I had a client who had signed an agreement with a company that was taking payments over, if I recall, it was 27 months and in certainly more than 12 payments. That would make it a regulated consumer credit agreement, and they were not regulated, which ultimately amounted to a criminal offence. And of course, as a result of my letter pointing out the fact that this was a criminal offence, they suddenly didn't want to chase my client for their money any longer. So of course, you can decide to use buy now, pay it later for all sorts of things these days, be it a sofa, be it a TV, gifts, and all kinds of things. But as a reminder, please do check that you can afford to repay it. And in my view, just as guidance, you understand, I think you would be better off using some kind of credit card that you've already been approved for, that you've already had your assessment and your affordability checks done, and besides which you will automatically get the protection so long as it's more than £100 spent towards this item with your credit card under Section 75 of the Consumer Credit Act. So I hope this was useful, and I hope it's a valid warning to some of you that are going out to splash and splurge for this Christmas season. So if it has been, please do share it with somebody that you think might find it useful. Please do hit that like button and subscribe. And as always, thank you so much for watching.